While taking a leisurely walk along the riverside, Ethan stumbled upon a sight that made his heart skip a beat. An animal paw, motionless, protruding from the chilly waters. Instinctively, he edged closer, ready to plunge into the water for a rescue. But a stern voice behind him froze him in his tracks, advising against any attempt to help. The reason behind this warning left Ethan pale as a ghost. Ethan's first instinct was just to ignore the stranger telling him not to go into the water. He does not know this man and has no reason to listen to him. But he does clearly see that there is an animal in need of help, and considering how much of an animal lover Ethan is, the choice seems to be a no-brainer. But as he tries to jump into the water, the stranger pulls him back just before he is able to jump. Ethan starts to get angry and struggles to get out of the stranger's grip. But he quickly realizes that this man is a lot stronger than he initially expected. There is no way he is going to be able to get out of it, and Ethan has to watch as he slowly sees the unmoving animal paw sink deeper and deeper into the water until it is most definitely out of reach. Only when the animal was absolutely gone did the strange let go of Ethan. He needed a moment to really realize what had just happened to him. Everything had gone so fast from the moment he first saw the animal's paw stick out of that muddy water. All he had come here to do was just take a nice forest walk, and now all of this happened. Ethan turned around to the man who was already walking away from him calmly. Ethan screamed in his direction, demanding to get an explanation. The mysterious man was stopped in his tracks and turned around. Only now was Ethan able to get a good look at the person who just held him down for what felt like minutes. And the man was not what he expected at all. The man looked very old and not well off. His clothes were dirty, ripped, and old. He had a very scruffy beard and even some small scratches over his face and arms. Ethan guessed that this might be a homeless man who lived out his days in the forest. But that realization did not explain the action of the man at all, and neither did the response that he got from the homeless-looking man. "Just be glad I saved you." The homeless man bit those words to Ethan, almost spitting with anger. Then he turned around and continued walking into the forest, leaving Ethan behind very confused, to say the least. What the hell did that old lunatic mean by saying that he saved him from something? His actions had most likely cost the life of a poor animal. The man did nothing but save something or somebody. In an act of almost desperation, Ethan walks to the water's edge to see if there is still anything he can do to help the animal. The water is so muddy that he can't see anything below the surface. So Ethan also had no way to gauge how deep the water was. Maybe that is what the homeless man was trying to save him from. Maybe you can easily drown in this water. Ethan looked around and found a fairly large stick that he could break off a tree. He could use that to test how deep the water was. Maybe if it was really shallow, he could even get in and see if he could get out the animal still. He knew roughly where it had sunken. And so, armed with the long stick, Ethan walked back to the water's edge and tried to find the bottom of the water. It did not take him long before feeling something at the end of his stick, but after lifting it a bit and poking down again, it seemed to be gone. Maybe he hit a fish or something? But Ethan speculated that that would have felt a lot different, and he pushed the stick down a bit deeper until he was sure that he reached the bottom. It was not as firm as he expected, but at least it did not disappear this time. He took the stick out of the water again to see how far the water could be seen on it. He quickly determined that if he went in the water, it would only come up to about his chest. He did not feel any strong currently pulling on the stick when it was in the water, nor did he see any damage on it from passing animals or debris. It seemed like it was safe for him to get in the water. Ethan paused, eyeing the murky depths. The decision weighed on him, heavy and uncertain. This was no small risk, plunging into unknown waters for an animal that might no longer be alive. Yet, the pull of unresolved fate nudged him forward. Resolute, he shed his outer layers until only his underpants remained. With one last glance at the tranquil surface, he stepped in, feeling the cold embrace of the river. The water enveloped him, cold and dense. He moved cautiously, mindful of the unseen floor below. As Ethan waded further, the reality of his quest settled in. He was here for a creature he couldn't save in time, driven by a need for closure or perhaps redemption. The water, now at his chest, hid its secrets well, challenging Ethan to discover the truth that lay beneath its surface. With every step, Ethan felt the riverbed's odd texture underfoot, bumpy, uneven, and at times sharply unpleasant. He progressed, driven by a grim determination to uncover the story of the lost animal. His hands searched the water, feeling for any sign of the creature. This wasn't just about rescuing anymore. It was about facing the harsh outcome of his delayed action, however painful it might be. As Ethan's hands brushed against something solid, his heart leaped. He knelt in the water, the surface rippling around him, and carefully lifted what he found. It wasn't the animal he had hoped to save, but a tangle of debris and branches, a grim reminder of the river's hidden dangers. Disappointed but undeterred, Ethan continued his search, pushing deeper into the murky waters, driven by a need to know the animal's fate. Just as Ethan began to feel the weight of his fruitless search, a distant sound pierced the quiet, the unmistakable hum of a car engine. In this secluded stretch of the forest, the noise was out of place, jarring. Ethan paused, curiosity piqued. What business had a car here, far from the beaten path? The question hung in the air, compelling him to investigate, despite the unresolved mystery of the waters. Ethan froze, the sound of an approaching car slicing through the silence of the secluded area. Why a vehicle would venture so far into the wilderness was beyond him. This place, a refuge from the clamour of civilization, was supposed to be his alone for the day. The realization that he was not as isolated as he believed dawned on Ethan as the vehicle halted at the water's edge. This far from any town or road, the appearance of a car was not just unusual, it was alarming. Ethan's heart raced as the car's occupants emerged, their presence shattering the day's tranquility. Dressed in gear that screamed forest authority, but with an aura that suggested otherwise, they approached the water's edge with purpose. Ethan, still waist-deep in the murky water, could only watch as the stranger's intentions unfolded with urgency, a stark contrast to the peaceful solitude he had been enjoying moments before. Shouts broke the air as the men spotted Ethan, their commands laced with an intensity that left no room for negotiation. "Get out now!" echoed across the water, their tone brooking no argument. Confusion spiraled into fear when the glint of weapons became visible. Whatever their reason for being here, it was clear they meant business. Ethan complied, the cold water suddenly feeling even chillier as he made his way to the shore. Back on land, Ethan stood, drenched and bewildered, as the men continued to shout orders. His gaze dropped to his legs, now coated in thick mud, a stark reminder of the ordeal in the water. Worse, smears of blood from unseen cuts marred his skin, a silent testimony to the river's hidden dangers. The men's urgent voices faded into the background as Ethan grappled with the immediate concern for his injuries and the lingering question of their aggressive arrival. On the edge of the land, Ethan knelt, his gaze fixed on the mud enveloping his legs and the blood that marked his feet. The roughness of the riverbed had left its mark, unnoticed until now. As he assessed the damage, the surreal nature of his predicament began to sink in. He was far from just a casual wanderer now. He was caught in a situation beyond his understanding. Without a word, one of the armed men approached Ethan, snapping handcuffs around his wrists with an efficiency that spoke of routine. He was then pulled to his feet and pushed towards the car with a firmness that allowed no resistance. Ethan's mind raced with questions, but it was clear that answers would not be forthcoming from his captors. Their silence was as cold and impenetrable as the handcuffs binding him. The men offered no explanation as they escorted Ethan to the vehicle. Questions about their identity, purpose, and the reason for his detention hung in the air, unanswered. Ethan could only guess at their roles. Forest rangers, perhaps, but the presence of weapons suggested something more ominous. Their authority seemed unquestionable, their intentions mysterious. Ethan's mind whirled with speculation as he considered the identity of his captors. Forest rangers were known to patrol these areas, yet the armed presence suggested a level of enforcement beyond what was typical. The situation was unprecedented, leaving Ethan to wonder about the real reason behind his unexpected detention. With no information offered, he could only follow their commands, hoping to avoid further danger. Resigned to his situation, Ethan found himself acquiescing to the demands of the armed men. Their intentions remained a mystery, wrapped in silence and authority. As he was ushered into the car, Ethan's thoughts turned to survival. Compliance seemed his only option, a necessary strategy to navigate the uncertainty of his circumstances. The quiet threat of force underscored the seriousness of his predicament, leaving him to ponder his next move in silence. The car wove through the dense forest, the silence inside so thick it was almost tangible. Ethan sat, handcuffed and bare, between two of the armed men who had taken him. The familiar landscapes of the forest were now behind, replaced by deeper, untouched wilderness. Not a word was shared among them, casting Ethan into a well of his own anxious thoughts as they drove further from the world he knew. Gathering a shard of bravery, Ethan's voice shattered the quiet. "Can I please have my clothes back?" he ventured, seeking a shred of normalcy. The answer was a swift, silent refusal from the front passenger, a clear message that no comfort would be provided. This denial left Ethan feeling more exposed, both physically and emotionally, as he processed the reality of his vulnerability. Amidst the turmoil, Ethan's mind latched onto a sliver of hope, his phone, which was in the pocket of his clothes. While his request for his clothes was denied, the thought that they were still within reach brought a faint comfort. In the back of his mind, he harbored thoughts of escape or summoning help, clinging to this possibility as a lifeline in his precarious situation. Their journey concluded at an isolated ranger outpost, hidden even deeper within the thicket of the forest. The swift transition from car to building offered Ethan no chance to orient himself. The outpost seemed abandoned, a detail that heightened Ethan's unease about the intentions of his armed captors and the unclear reasons behind his forced isolation from the outside world. In a sparse, unfurnished room within the outpost, Ethan's brief interaction with the outside ended as his clothes were thrown at him before the door was firmly locked. Dressing quickly, Ethan felt a momentary relief at the return of his personal garments. However, this comfort was short-lived. Patting down his clothes for his belongings, despair settled in as he found nothing. His last hope of contact with the outside world had been stripped away, leaving him truly alone as the lock clicked, sealing his fate. Frantically, Ethan checked every pocket, hoping to find anything that could help him. But it was futile. His phone, wallet, everything was gone. The realization hit hard as the door's lock clicked, a sound that marked his complete isolation. Trapped in a room within an unknown outpost, he was left to confront the sinking feeling of being utterly disconnected from any form of help or escape. Anger bubbled up in Ethan as he paced the small room. The lack of answers, the abrupt kidnapping, and now this imprisonment. It all made no sense. He was just a guy who loved the forest, who'd come out for a walk, not someone who should be locked up without explanation. The injustice of his situation fueled his frustration, leaving him seething against the unseen forces that put him here. The room's small window became Ethan's only connection to the outside world. Too small to escape through, but it offered a sliver of hope. He managed to pull himself up for a better look. The lush greenery outside was both a prison and a reminder of where he was, deep in the heart of the forest, far from the familiar trails and paths he loved. The thick vegetation seemed to swallow the building whole. Straining for a better view, Ethan saw the extent of their seclusion. The outpost was nestled in an almost impenetrable thicket of trees and underbrush, a location chosen for its isolation. The so-called road leading to this place was more a path than anything meant for regular travel. It dawned on him then, the strategic placement of this outpost, hidden away from prying eyes and far from accidental discovery. From his vantage point, Ethan contemplated the unusual remoteness of the ranger outpost. Unlike any other he'd seen, this facility was deliberately concealed, buried deep within the forest's embrace. The realization sparked more questions. Why go to such lengths to hide this place? What were they keeping here? Or perhaps, what were they hiding from? It was clear this outpost served a purpose far removed from the conservation efforts typical of ranger stations. This outpost, shrouded in secrecy, was unlike any ranger station Ethan had ever heard of. Its remote location deep in the forest hinted at something more than just a base for park rangers. Why was it so hidden, so removed from the usual paths and trails? Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that whatever they were hiding here was the key to understanding his sudden and unexplained captivity. Hours ticked by slowly in Ethan's makeshift cell until the door creaked open, revealing a ranger with food and water in hand. The sight of another human, even one of his captors, brought a mix of relief and a surge of questions. Ethan accepted the provisions with a nod, his mind racing with thoughts of escape, or at the very least, some answers to the mounting list of unknowns. As Ethan ate, he pleaded with the ranger for information, any detail that could shed light on his situation. The ranger's hesitation was the first crack in the otherwise impenetrable demeanor of Ethan's captors. "You won't be here long," he finally said, a statement that sparked a mixture of hope and confusion in Ethan. What did they plan to do with him? And why was he taken in the first place? The ranger's next words caught Ethan off guard. "You were arrested for going into the water," he explained, mentioning a forest camera that had captured Ethan's unauthorized dip. The absurdity of the charge was not lost on Ethan, since when was swimming a crime in these parts? But the seriousness in the ranger's voice told Ethan this was no ordinary rule or regulation he had broken. Ethan pressed for more, desperate to understand the bizarre reasoning behind his arrest. The ranger's response was cryptic. "The water is strictly forbidden," he stated, leaving Ethan with more questions than answers. Why was access to the water so tightly controlled? What was so dangerous or important about it that warranted surveillance and swift punishment? The ranger's unwillingness to elaborate only deepened the mystery surrounding the forbidden waters. The ranger's warning about the water, shrouded in mystery, left Ethan puzzled. It was strictly forbidden, but no reason was given, no explanation offered. Ethan racked his brain, trying to recall any sign or warning that might have indicated the danger or restriction. Nothing came to mind. The forest had always been a place of freedom for him, not one of hidden rules and unseen boundaries. Ethan replayed his earlier trek to the river, scanning his memory for any missed detail that might have hinted at the prohibition. But no, there had been no signs, no warnings, nothing to suggest that the water was off limits. How was he supposed to know? The lack of information, the absence of a simple warning sign, it all felt unjust, a rule enforced without any attempt to communicate it. The ranger's patience wore thin as Ethan pressed for answers, for any rationale behind the strict rules governing the forest and its waters. "You shouldn't even be here," the ranger finally snapped, a veiled suggestion that Ethan's presence in the forest was the real issue. With those parting words, the door was slammed shut, the lock clicking into place once again, leaving Ethan in isolation as the echo of the ranger's footsteps faded. Through the small window, Ethan watched as the outpost emptied, each figure disappearing into the surrounding forest until he was left in complete solitude. The realization that he was alone, truly alone, settled heavily upon him. Any hope of immediate escape dwindled as the light outside began to fade, the forest around him growing quieter as night approached. Determined not to resign himself to his fate without a fight, Ethan explored every inch of his confinement for a way out. He tested the window, the door, the walls, any potential weakness that might offer an escape. But each effort was met with the same result: failure. The outpost was secure, his captors careful to leave no avenue for escape. As darkness enveloped the forest outside, Ethan faced the grim reality of his situation. As darkness enveloped the forest, Ethan realized the inevitable. He was to spend the night in this cold, unwelcoming room. The comfort of sleep seemed like a distant dream as worry and fear churned within him. The quiet of the forest at night was a stark contrast to the turmoil in his mind, making the task of falling asleep nearly impossible. Sleep finally claimed Ethan, offering a brief escape from his dire situation. However, it was short-lived. A sound, unmistakable in the silence of the outpost, jolted him awake. Footsteps? The building creaked under the weight of an unseen presence. Someone had entered, disturbing the precarious peace Ethan had found in sleep. His heart raced as he listened, trying to decipher the intentions of the night visitor. Peering out the window revealed nothing. The night had swallowed any signs of arrival. No cars, no lights, just the dense shadows of the forest. Then, the unmistakable sound of the lock being tampered with reached Ethan's ears. Fear gripped him. Could this be the end? Was someone coming to silence him forever? The uncertainty was paralyzing, each click of the lock a countdown to an unknown fate. Ethan's survival instincts kicked in. He scanned the room for anything to use as a weapon, settling on a sturdy piece of broken furniture. His grip tightened around it as the door began to open. Every possible scenario raced through his mind, each more terrifying than the last. But the figure that stepped into the dim light of the room was not who he expected. There, standing before him, was the homeless man he had encountered by the river, the one who had warned him against entering the water. The man's expression was grave, urgent. "We need to go now," he said, his voice low but insistent. Ethan was stunned, disbelief mingling with a flicker of hope. The seriousness in the homeless man's eyes left no room for hesitation or doubt. "We need to go now," he urgently whispered, pulling Ethan to his feet with a firm grip. Confusion and fear mingled within Ethan, but the gravity of the situation and the man's determined demeanor propelled him forward. Together, they stepped into the dimly lit corridor, moving swiftly towards the promise of freedom that lay in the unknown darkness ahead. Navigating through the outpost, they quickly passed the central room where Ethan's gaze was immediately drawn to a red, flashing light on the wall. It was a silent alarm, silently screaming their escape to whoever was watching. The urgency of their predicament escalated with each ominous flash of the light, casting long, dangerous shadows over their hurried escape. Despite the mounting danger, they pressed on, the red beacon marking each step of their desperate bid for freedom. Breaking out into the chilly night air, Ethan and the homeless man plunged into the forest's dense underbrush, the blackness of the woods swallowing them whole. Almost immediately, the sound of approaching cars filled the air, a clear and present sign their escape had not gone unnoticed. With no time for questions or hesitation, Ethan followed the man's lead, trusting in his unexpected ally as they navigated the perilous dark, their hearts racing in unison against the threat of recapture. Their frantic dash through the shadowy forest continued unrelentingly until the ominous sounds of pursuit finally faded into a distant echo. Ethan's lungs burned fiercely with each breath, and his legs ached with the strain of their relentless escape. In this moment of life and death, trusting the homeless man wasn't just a choice. It was an act of survival, a necessary leap of faith into the arms of a stranger who now held both their fates in the balance. Eventually, they stopped, their bodies unable to sustain the breakneck pace any longer. They collapsed onto the damp forest floor, each gasping for air like castaways desperate for a breath of life. Ethan, caught by surprise at the man's unexpected resilience, could only speculate silently about the life that had carved such endurance into his saviour's bones. There, under the dense canopy of ancient trees, they sat in shared exhaustion, the weight of their harrowing escape, and the enigma of the journey yet to unfold, pressing down on them like the very air they struggled to breathe. The homeless man's anger was palpable as he scolded Ethan, "I told you not to go in the water." Ethan's response was a quiet apology, laced with the guilt of his actions. He hadn't intended to cause any harm. His heart had led him to try and save the animal in distress. Ethan explained his actions, driven by a desire to help an animal in need, unable to bear the thought of leaving it to suffer. The homeless man's silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken words and thoughts. It was a moment of reflection, perhaps understanding, as the gravity of Ethan's decision and its consequences settled around them, bridging the gap of misunderstanding with a shared concern for the forest's inhabitants. The conversation turned to the fate of the animal, its loss a point of sorrow for Ethan. He questioned why it had to end that way, seeking understanding in the midst of confusion. The homeless man's response was a mix of resignation and sadness, acknowledging the tragedy without providing the answers Ethan sought. It was a moment of shared grief, for the animal and for the forest that had once been a sanctuary for all its creatures. Finally, the homeless man sighed, hinting at a deeper, more dangerous truth about the water. "It's very toxic," he said, leaving Ethan to grasp the gravity of his exposure. The warning was clear. Even brief contact with the water could be harmful, a stark revelation that filled Ethan with a new wave of concern for both his well-being and the health of the forest. Looking down at his legs, Ethan was shocked to find them marked with red, irritated patches, evidence of the water's toxicity. The realization hit him hard. He had been lucky to escape with minor exposure. This visual confirmation of the water's danger was a powerful reminder of the risks he had unknowingly taken, cementing the homeless man's warnings in his mind and marking the beginning of a deeper understanding of the forest's plight. The homeless man shared his story with Ethan, revealing that the forest had been his home for many years. He spoke fondly of a time when the water was clear and the land unspoiled. His deep connection to this place was evident in his every word, painting a picture of a life intertwined with the natural world, a stark contrast to the polluted present. A few years back, the man continued, companies began dumping toxic waste into the water, poisoning his home. Despite his efforts to alert the rangers, his concerns were dismissed, his warnings ignored. This betrayal of trust and duty marked a turning point, the beginning of a silent battle to protect the forest and its inhabitants from unseen, man-made dangers. The homeless man's tale grew darker as he revealed a web of corruption entangling the local rangers. Companies had bribed them to turn a blind eye, ensuring their toxic activities remained unchecked. This conspiracy silenced voices like his, voices that sought to defend the forest. Ethan listened, the reality of the man's struggle and the depth of the betrayal he faced becoming painfully clear. Realization dawned on Ethan, regret for his initial distrust mingling with gratitude for the man's protection. With the homeless man's guidance, Ethan began the arduous journey back to the city. They moved cautiously, avoiding rangers and unseen threats, their path a testament to the man's intimate knowledge of the forest. Despite the rangers' efforts to locate them, the duo remained ghosts among the trees, their bond strengthened by shared secrets and a common cause against the corruption poisoning the heart of the forest. Under the guidance of the homeless man's wisdom, Ethan navigated the forest's hidden paths, avoiding the dangers that lurked within. Their mission was clear: gather undeniable evidence of the toxic waste. Together, they collected samples of the contaminated water and took photographs of the affected areas. Back in the safety of the town, Ethan approached the local police, armed with the evidence he and the homeless man had gathered. Presenting his case was challenging, met with skepticism and bureaucratic hesitation. However, Ethan's persistence and the undeniable truth captured in the water samples and photographs gradually won over some of the officers. Support within the police force began to materialize, a small but crucial victory in the fight for the forest. The actions of Ethan and the homeless man sparked a city-wide movement against the companies responsible for dumping toxic waste and the complicit rangers. A lawsuit was filed, rallying the community around the cause of protecting their natural surroundings. Meanwhile, the homeless man returned to his forest home, his identity as a guardian of the land now recognized. Both he and Ethan were hailed as heroes, their courage and determination inspiring a collective stand for environmental justice.